All right, there's Brian. Hopefully, we can get him up as a speaker and we'll be good to go. Oh, look at that. That was quick. G'day, Brian. Can you hear us all right?
Hi, can you hear me?
We sure can.
You never know. AirPods sometimes connect, sometimes they don't. It's kind of a 50-50 thing.
Yeah, for sure. We had a couple of issues on some previous Twitter spaces trying to get people up speaking, but yeah, it seemed to work just fine, which is great. So, probably don't know who I am since I'm a talking rocket, but it's Nick Ashley, also known as Mav here. So, anyone in the audience who doesn't know me, I do marketing for Rocket Pool. And then also up on the stage, we have Ken, one of our rocket scientists, I guess ODAR members, community advocate, is going to host the call as usual. And then we have a guest from Ether Capital, the CEO, Brian. So I will pass over to Ken to host the first part of this call. And then after we've had a bit of a chat, we can cover off a few Atlas questions towards the end. Over to you, Ken.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Maverick. Brian, nice to meet you. My name's Ken, and very excited to have you on here as our guest speaker today on our community call. And we have kind of a lot of questions for you in there for it. And one of the things I first noticed when reading about your profile is it says you've been in the space for close to a decade. Would you mind sharing with our community a little bit about you and kind of how you started in the industry?
Yeah, happy to. And I also look back on those early days very fondly of just how small crypto was and how crazy it seemed to be as a concept, especially, talking to your normie friends back then. It just seemed like complete insanity what you were telling them was going to happen in the world and internet money. I had a friend in, I think, late 2012 who wanted to buy a used iPad off Craigslist, and he said, "Do you want to come be my backup?" I said, "I'm not sure. I'm like 5'9" and a half. Don't weigh very much. Don't go to the gym. I'm not sure I'm your best person to bring, but sure, why not?" And the guy was selling everything he had for Bitcoin. He was selling his house. He was selling his car. Every possession and putting into this thing called Bitcoin. He wrote some chicken scratch on a piece of paper. Here's what this thing is. And I looked to my friend when we walked out, we're in the car. It's like, have you ever heard of this Bitcoin thing? We're like, no, this guy's completely insane. Um, and so I went and did some light reading on Bitcoin, thought it was really interesting. But I think like a lot of people, when they first hear of these assets, they don't think it'll ever work, or, it's too crazy. And they ignore it and put it in a drawer. But for me on Reddit, this would pop up on the front page. And so I did a deeper dive. Now it's 2013. And I had a couple friends who also were interested in kind of researching it. And we had a lunch where all we talked about basically was Bitcoin. And the question was, should you mine it? Are there other assets out there like it? Namecoin, Litecoin, Purecoin, Feathercoin. These things were all floating around back then. And I was fortunate to have been in Toronto, which is where I was born and grew up. And so as part of the Toronto meetup group, there were kind of a handful or two handfuls of people at bars. And at this time, Mastercoin and colored coins were a conversation. And then, Vitalik is showing up on that scene or as part of that scene, and the Ethereum white paper floats about. So I first entered the space with interest in Bitcoin, but Ethereum specifically just seemed super interesting because it could just do things that you could tell were never going to happen, on a protocol like Bitcoin. And rather than having side chains running off Bitcoin to do more complex things. And I think rootstock already was around as an idea. It just seemed like that's never going to plug in. Ethereum is probably the thing. Got really excited about it. And then fell, even deeper down the rabbit hole. And then in 2017, the ideas of Ether Capital were being put together. And this is amongst that, or to the backdrop of the boom of 2017, the ICO era, and I guess Bitcoin is on its way up to 20,000. The Bitcoin Cash fork happens. And the question was, could you create an access point in the capital markets for people who aren't technologists, that don't want to deal with self-hosted wallets and keys and registering on these exchanges that they may or may not trust, and then have an access point, like a stock, where they could get exposure to some of the native assets, but then maybe some of the businesses, kind of a blend of token exposure and picks and shovels. And I think people in the space think a lot about, the whole point of the assets is to remove the agency. You're replacing the agency with like game theory and a protocol. You don't need people sitting in the middle trying to extract rent. And I fully agree and align with that. But there is another group of people out there who do want something that's clean and easy, and they're happy to pay for that access point. And so Ether Capital was formed to that backdrop, and officially went public in early 2018. And I joined a few months later. That's kind of my history over the 10 years. Happy to dive deeper into any part of that you'd like. But I've watched everything from it being just kind of I think a sub-billion-dollar total market cap of all assets, I think in 2012, to where we're at today. And it's pretty remarkable to see that trajectory.
Yeah, well, fascinating story, man. Definitely OG vibes there for certain here as I'm having flashbacks. So maybe tell us a little bit about you gave us a little bit about the genesis of it and your backstory, but what is Ether Capital? Explain it to us like we're five. What is it? What does it do?
Yeah, so Ether Capital is a publicly listed entity in Canada under the ticker ETHC. The first thing we did when the company was put together is deploy pretty much all the cash that we raised in the going public transaction into ETH. We're big believers in that specifically. And we have a three-pronged strategy. One is to be a net accumulator of ETH. We're long this asset. We're not here to trade it. We're not looking to buy, sell, hold other L1s. We really just believe in ETH long term. And then we want to make that asset productive. So things like staking, restaking is something we're starting to think about, even though it's still a bit away, but make the treasury productive. And then some of the tools that we have to build for our own internal needs, given our unique structure, the question is, can we build business lines off some of those tools and provide that out to the community, provide it out to other institutions or other funds that are looking to bring ETH as an access point, to a different type of investor. So anything to do with ETH, we're interested in, but really it's focusing on the base layer infrastructure more so than speculating in DeFi or NFTs or metaverse. It's not that we're against any of those verticals. We just think that our strengths are best leaned into at the base layer, network security, staking, reporting, monitoring. That's our wheelhouse. That's what interests us. And then at night, we're all, playing around with everything else. So I was going to say the degenerate word, but anyway,
Yeah,
probably finding a Twitter space different than a Bloomberg appearance.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we're all degens. We've got a great community channel called Trading. We don't ever really talk about trading things in there, but I think if you haven't joined, you'll certainly love it. So you mentioned staking, and one of the things I read on the website, kind of doing my intel ahead of today's episode, was that you guys are saying you have 37,000 ETH staked. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and curious about if you could share any of your hardware setups, like what clients are you running? What's your hardware? How does one stake 37,000 ETH?
So let's bucket this actually into kind of two separate points. One is what the current setup is and why we have that, and then where we want it to go. Because I have, and I think a lot of the community has a vision towards what we want staking or protocol security to look like. And we're not there today. We've got a lot of concentration with a few providers, a few clients, maybe a few geographic regions. Those are things that need to get worked on in the coming years if we're going to have really a politically neutral settlement layer. ETHCAP does its own custody. We don't have a third party holding any of our ETH. That was very important to us from day one. Doesn't mean that we would never consider it, but currently we run our own multi-sig. First, it was called the Gnosis multi-signature wallet with an interface that was at times quite challenging. But now it's the Gnosis Safe. We have a blend of different hardware wallets that's managed by a number of the directors and management at ETHCAP. So there's no one person with any one key. It's a pretty high threshold to move any meaningful amount of money. We do have about 45,000 ETH, but currently we're staking just over 35,000 of that. When the Beacon chain went live, I guess December 2020. Yeah, that makes
Yep.
sense.
Yep.
Yeah, December 2020, the Beacon chain goes live. We were talking about staking since the day I joined ETHCAP in July of 2018. Running around saying staking is going to be a thing. It's right around the corner. It's going to be this huge thing. And of course, it took a few years to get ourselves there. But it's something that we knew from day one was going to be really important, and something that if you have a huge treasury like we do, you want to help the network. You want to generate that yield. You shouldn't just be sitting idle on a protocol token that you're bullish on. That doesn't make any sense. The question for us is what's appropriate and when, given our size and we're managing shareholder capital, what's appropriate to do and when. And that's where there's a fair bit of nuance. The good and bad part of our structure is that it does come with some different obligations. We have to disclose, quarterly everything we're doing, right? We have to put out our financials. We have to put out a press release. We have to do year ends. We have auditors. We do have a big four auditor. We used to be with KPMG. Now we're with Ernst & Young. And so there's a lot of people that need to understand what you're doing and making sure that it's appropriate for your structure. So we're not a private fund. We're not a family office. We're not, one person with a ledger clicking a staking button. And so that handcuffs a little bit. When the Beacon chain went live, I think at the time there was no way, I think that you needed to generate something compatible with BLS. And so you actually couldn't use a lot of the hardware, or almost any of the hardware. I think you couldn't do a multi-sig, or it was ridiculously complicated to do a multi-sig when Beacon chain went live. And so we used I think the EF had a website that specifically was to help you set up a wallet, but it was a wallet where you're generating the seed at a kitchen table basically. And so we only deployed 32 ETH into that Genesis block. We did it because we wanted to press release it. We wanted to make a statement that we're supportive of proof of stake. We're excited about the transition away from proof of work, whenever that would happen. And so we only ran one validator, and we partnered with Staked, who since was acquired by Kraken. And that's how that one validator is running. But it doesn't really map the setup that we wanted, because we do believe in custody being this multi-sig thing, and at scale, that's how it should be appropriately overseen. And so over time, we've scaled up more ETH, thousands at a time, 10,000 at a time. We partnered with Figment to run those validators, and that is deployed through our multi-sig. Now, that's where we're at today. There's a fair amount of diligence that goes into how we can work with another provider. Keep in mind, as I said before, we have these requirements around audit, who can oversee things, what the terms and conditions look like. Are we holding additional tokens? So the liquid staking derivative tokens, I think, would be challenging in our structure. And I'm also happy to get into that of why I think ETFs or other structured products are not likely to hold liquid staking derivative tokens, but it may be different for a different type of institutional customer. But for us, that's not something I think we can do yet, but we are looking at where we go from here. So that's kind of our current setup, is running this multi-sig over to Figment. We don't have as much control, of course, when you have a third-party provider on what relayer you're running. But the world that I hope is coming is one where you could have multiple custodians and multiple staking providers, and you would have the ability, if you're an institution like ours, whether we like it or not, we may have requirements around OFAC compliance, running a relayer, not running a relayer, which one we're running, certain types of vetting on transactions, not sure yet. It's still really early days, but I think that that's the world we want to get to, where the individual staker can make those choices. They can have multiple providers. Ideally, you could do this with your own custody solution. I don't want to see a world where everyone signs up for one major exchange, because it's easy. They deposit the assets, they click the stake button, and then, off they go. They have no way to monitor what's happening. in terms of missed attestations, block rewards, did they get a block that day or not? So far, I haven't seen a lot of that type of transparency from staking companies or trading platforms, but I hope that that comes. We want to enable some of that. We built a dashboard that we use internally that you can, through our website, sign up as a beta user. And it basically lets you take your public keys and then start to query a bunch of stats on your performance. There's a lot of features that we have in the queue that we hope to roll out in the coming months. Right now we are pulling data from Beacon Chain, but we would like that to be independent. I think it's important that that's independent, where you could see the financials, you could reference things back and forth, you could choose what your price feed is. So that tool will enable us to have multiple staking providers, including ourselves. We'd like to run our own infrastructure. So that's kind of where we're at today, and what we hope happens in the next few months. Multiple providers and being able to monitor it all in one place.
Oh, fascinating. Let me explore a couple of those topics just a little bit more in depth. If I back up before we talk about the new dashboard you guys are building, you mentioned that there might be some challenges in having Ether Capital take on a liquid staking token, like, for example, becoming a liquid staker and holding, for example, rETH as part of your assets or investment strategy. But what about, have you guys considered or looked at becoming a node operator on Rocket Pool, where you still hold your ETH and you actually run nodes, but gain an additional return by being a Rocket Pool node operator? Has that ever crossed your path, or have you done any evaluations on that?
Cross paths, and literally had a discussion this morning about that with my team. I mean, we want to do all of this stuff. The question is just how, and it's really just a question of how, and knowing there's a bit of self-regulation that we have to do, where we're sensitive to what we do that seems responsible. As I said, we have to put out these quarterly reports. Once a year, we have to file what's called an annual information form, as well as an MD&A, management discussion and analysis. These are, public disclosure documents that talk about the business, they talk about various risks. And part of our job as management is to think through what is appropriate and when. So, you can look at when the Beacon Chain went live, could we have staked 50% of our ETH or more at that time? Well, of course we could have, but knowing that you had no insight into when you would have liquidity on it, if the price of ETH crashed, and we needed, well, granted at the time, I guess it was like $100 or $200, something like that. But so it already was crashed. But if we, let's say, needed to sell some of that ETH to pay for our overhead, you wouldn't have that liquidity. It would be locked there. So we would make the decision internally that even though we want to lean heavier into staking, it's not appropriate yet. When it comes to the liquid staking derivatives, we haven't yet seen exactly how regulators react to some of these derivative tokens tied to staking. There's also some nuance around how you mark the value of those tokens. And I know a lot of people think it's easy. You just go on CoinGecko, or whatever tool you're using, you check the daily price, it pulls it off a couple different exchanges. When you get into the world of public disclosures and big four accounting firms, this can be quite a hair-pulling exercise. Anyone wants to talk about this at length, happy to fill you in, but it's a different process to know how liquid is that market. Can you actually mark the value of that asset appropriately? And it's one of those things where there's no definition to what a liquid market would look like. And so what we can't have is a scenario where we would hold any type of token where in our disclosures, you couldn't actually mark the value of the asset. Even though I know some people might go, but it's a derivative or it's tied to the price of ETH. It doesn't quite work that way, unfortunately. And so what would be very bad for us is to have a lot of ETH deployed into something, and then in our financials, it actually gets marked as a zero, because it's unclear, if you can ever get it back, what price you could get it back. So that kind of puts those assets off into the corner, at least temporarily. We are super interested in spinning up our own infrastructure, one, to be able to say that we're running our own validators and contribute to network diversification. Very, very, very important to us. We're close to hopefully being able to do that. We're on testnet right now. And then we would love to run that infrastructure for exactly things like Rocket Pool, help do that, help say, here's a dashboard where if other people want to use it, you also can monitor whatever infrastructure you're running. I'd love that to happen, and I think that we're close to that. So all of these efforts that the community is making are fantastic. Our question will be, at what point is it appropriate for our structure to lean in and participate?
Oh, fascinating, fascinating. So many questions here. Let me explore just one other one you mentioned about kind of having the liquidity or being able to cash out the reserves. So we're less than 23 days away from Shanghai.
Yeah.
How do you see the ability to have withdrawals changing ETH capital or the staking business? Like how is that going to impact you?
For us, it makes us comfortable staking more. Right now, we're holding back, I suppose it's about 10,000 ETH that we still could deploy. I think that ETH generally we'd like to either run on our own infrastructure or get involved with something like Rocket Pool. And so we're holding it back for some other opportunity rather than just saying we want one provider and to maximize our treasury to 98% staked, which we generally do want to do. But right now we have to hold something back because we hold some amount of our treasury in cash. But if something were to happen to the price of ETH, or the Shanghai upgrade doesn't take place when we think, we need to make sure that we have cash to pay our bills. So the liquidity on staked ETH, I think, is bullish. I think it means the ETH that's sitting on the sidelines that was waiting for, one, staking to one day, come about, two, to see that the merge took place without any hiccup, and three, that they know that they can get liquidity on that ETH within a reasonable time period. And who knows, maybe up front there's a bunch of people that want to withdraw their staked ETH, and the queue is, I can't remember how much ETH can enter or exit per day, but there is that queue there. Once that bottleneck erodes and is no longer a barrier, I think anyone who's holding ETH for any period of time that's not 10 days or 20 days because they're trying to trade it, that ETH should be staked. It should become productive during that time. It's like buying some short-term government bond while you're sitting on a bunch of cash in an account. Although that comment may have a joke embedded into it, given everything that's happening currently. So but you get my point. I think it's a big thing for the industry and institutions that have exposure to ETH or are considering it. This is one extra thing. It's one more upgrade to show, look, it's happened. You can get liquidity. You can be comfortable doing it. So I would expect more people to stake on the other side of this. ETH Cap will stake more. We right now, I'm not saying we're ditching Figment. That's not at all what I'm trying to say, that we don't like them. But we would love to be able to diversify how we run our infrastructure. And so that ability comes about, when we can get access to that ETH. And right now we can't. It's just sitting there.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Well, I do want to explore a little bit your dashboard, but just one last question on the previous topic, which is you mentioned some of your obligations as being a public company based in Canada. Now I'm just a little south of you here in the U.S. But what is kind of your take of the Canadian government's approach on crypto regulation? Is it positive, neutral, optimistic? Like what would you summarize it at?
So there's lots of stuff that's happened up in Canada. Let's break it down from, I guess, the exchange side all the way through structured products. Structured products, I think we've done very well at greenlighting. You have companies like Ether Capital. You have companies listed in Canada. I think in the US there's a small number of Bitcoin mining companies, but that's kind of it. And I think no one wants to go through that listing process because they're not sure what the SEC is going to approve or not approve. So it's better to probably just stay away for now. At the same time, the retail appetite to buy these companies, a lot of pens down has happened in the last, I suppose, almost a year. Granted, it was, I think, June or whatever when Three Arrows collapsed. But the appetite from random people buying these stocks is far lower now than it was in that second half of 2020 through the end of 2021, where they're just buying any stock, any access point. And so being public also comes with, you're getting marked daily on the value of your treasury or your business operations. People may not want to be public for a little bit until the market fully turns. But when it comes to what can get approved, in Canada, you can have these companies get listed. We have actual spot ETFs. In the US, you only have futures-based ETFs, which is a far less efficient product, for a retail or institutional investor who wants that as their access point. So Canada has done really well with things traded in the capital markets. There also is a path to registration for the trading platforms. They all have to register with their provincial securities commission. Most of them basically all end up with the Ontario Securities Commission and have different registrations in different provinces. Whether they agree with who should be their principal regulator or not, different discussion. But the point is, there's at least a path towards being compliant. Banking access a little more difficult, but not as bad, I think, as what's happening in the US. So overall, Canada is not a bad place to operate your business, but there are still things that are being worked out. Things like DeFi, staking on some of the trading platforms has not been rolled out. A couple have already, but some of them have not been approved by the regulators. So you still have this, you have to come in and ask permission thing going on in Canada rather than platforms just rolling out these new products and services and hoping that it's fine. So that part of Canada, I think, is pretty good. So all in all, I'd say Canada's in pretty good shape, but we can still do better. We don't have a ton of custodian options in Canada. I'm talking crypto custodians. That's an area that I'm interested to see how it plays out. And do we enter a world where staking needs geographic diversification? I know right now people talk about staking providers in terms of just who's running the actual cloud or hardware infrastructure, but do we also at some point need to really be thoughtful about every country in the world, maybe this is someone's business model, that they need to get staking infrastructure set up in 50 to 100 countries around the world that guarantees some level of neutrality on this network. I don't know, but I can see that will happen over time as countries start to get pretty hostile towards this asset class. And I think we're probably on the cusp of it. And I don't just mean that they're trying to cut off the bank. I mean that they're really starting to choke whatever they can. And maybe staking providers is one area that right now hasn't engaged that much with regulators, but that could come soon, where they need a certain type of registration. Maybe they start demanding KYC or whatever AML program should be put in place. That hasn't really been contemplated yet from a staking level, but I can see that happening. And I'm not saying that I'm in favor of it. I'm not saying it's a good thing for these networks. I'm just saying I can see governments going in that direction. And as an industry, we need to be strong to battle against that. And part of that is just that there's enough diversification that there's no point in doing that. If you're a government, like China pushed out Bitcoin mining, and what happened? I mean, nothing. The infrastructure was spun up within a couple weeks in North America, and the network kept going regardless of one of the biggest powers in the world saying, not in my backyard.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for your perspectives on that. You actually kind of answered a few questions I had regarding kind of your perspective on decentralization. I wonder if we could now spend just a few moments talking about that dashboard, and in particular, how can folks in the Rocket Pool community kind of interact with ETH Capital? Is that dashboard something that we as home stakers or independent node operators could use? Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, would love anyone who wants to beta test and give us feedback on this product. My hands are together, so just insert the hand together emoji. So we built this dashboard because internally we had to go through this crazy rigmarole every quarter to report the financials. And the CFO, you might send him a beacon chain link and go, here's how much ETH we earned, today or this week. And they'll look at it and go, I don't really know how I'm supposed to interpret that. I need to know, what your consensus layer rewards are versus the execution layer rewards, because some are liquid and some are not liquid. So in our accounting, we need to break those out. And also because of our structure, we're marking the price of these assets every day at a very specific time from a very specific price source. And so that's how we have to do our financials. Not a problem that a lot of people at home have, but it's a problem that we had. And so we said, why don't we build a tool instead of running these Excel spreadsheets and trying to consolidate information from a whole bunch of different places? And so we built this dashboard to deal with the financial reporting so we could do our quarterly reports or our tax returns. And then also, can we start monitoring, whoever our providers are, just with that public key, can we look at missed attestations? Did we get a block proposed on a certain day? Could we just see some basic network level stats? And that tool does exist now. It's free for anyone who wants to sign up and use it. They can go to it through our website or reach out and we'll make them an account. But that tool, I'm hoping, can do far more things. Like, I remember one day asking our CTO, how much is the dollar value of, there's one spike on a graph that shows a bunch of missed attestations on one specific day relative to the others. So can you quantify what that says in dollars? And their response was, it's not a lot of money. It might only be $30 that we missed from that day, but seeing those spikes gives you insight into how the infrastructure is being run. Did they do something on that day that led to this? And do we need to ask some questions? So it's not even necessarily just I didn't make as much money on a certain day relative to others. It shows you, if you have multiple providers, you can get some of these insights. I want to pull in more of that into the dashboard. The rated.network team is doing some incredible stuff. We should be pulling that information in as well. So we're imagining that the dashboard is kind of the mission control. And even if you're running, one validator at home and you're a home staker, can this be a tool for you to track all your reporting financially, to monitor your uptime, to see how you performed on a certain day? We're not there yet, but I think whether you're running one validator or multiple, we want this to be the tool that everyone uses. And partially we built it because what we were getting from multiple staking providers in terms of reporting just wasn't comprehensive enough. So that's what this tool is. It is targeted a little bit toward institutions because we do want to help them have multiple custodians and multiple staking providers and monitor it in one place, do a bit of handholding. But we also want the community to be able to use this as well. And so if there's specific features that the community says, it'd be really great if you had X, Y, and Z, we want to hear about it, we'll build it, we'll put it in there. So we're just starting to get that feedback loop going. We made the announcement at ETH Denver. The website's now live, so people can click around. They could just take their keys and add a validator and see a bunch of stats and do their financial reporting. So it's exciting that it's now out in the wild, and now we're looking to build it out further.
Oh, excellent! Yeah, I'm kind of excited to check that out myself after the call here. Just in kind of like finalizing a few last questions here before we conclude this special guest segment here. Is there any ways in which our community can kind of stay in touch? I understand there might be a Discord from ETH Capital coming, and any other things that you feel that we haven't covered that you would like to share with us that you feel is important for the Rocket Pool community?
Yeah, I mean, there's a Discord. Obviously, we have Twitter, we have LinkedIn, although people on Twitter I don't think have LinkedIn. They're very different communities of people. But we want to be engaged more with the community, and we want to figure out how this tool works, not just for institutions, but for solo stakers as well. We do have a number of solo stakers who have signed up, who are playing with the dashboard, they're giving us feedback, and that's fantastic. We want more of that. We want to build this tool that for now is free. It may not be forever, but I would hope that there would always be a free version of this, and then let the institutions pay. But that's the kind of feedback that we need. So the Discord link and our Twitter, all that's on the website and can be found. Anyone can find me. Even though I don't tweet that much, I am lurking all the time and checking all my spam that I get on Twitter in my inbox. So however people want to stay in touch is great. If there's specific features that help the Rocket Pool community, we'd love to know about them through any channel, through Discord, through a DM, through an email, whatever it is. We want to know those features because we're successful if we can provide those to the actual stakers. We want to be one of the stakers, and then we want to provide tools for those stakers.
Well, excellent. Well, Brian, it has been just an absolute pleasure to learn a little bit about not only you, but Ether Capital. And like I said before, I'm kind of excited to go check out that dashboard. But very much want to thank you for joining us today, and certainly offer any of our services from the rocket scientists or the community if Ether Capital is ever interested in exploring further to be a node operator with Rocket Pool.
Thank you, and careful what you offer, because there could be an email that comes your way in about 2 hours to explore further how we can work together. But yeah, listen, I think we're all here for the same reason. I describe myself as more crypto native than I am traditional finance native, by far, actually. And so the thing I care about the most is that Ethereum continues to be the protocol that has the best security, that can backstop all the L2s, all the rollups. Eigenlayer is interesting to me. So I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff coming down the pipe, and we want to be part of it and just make sure that Ethereum continues to be the most important and best smart contract platform that's out there. So we're all in this together. Thank you for having me, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better than myself. You're more than welcome to stay for our second half, as we want to talk a little bit more with Mav about Atlas and kind of the latest release on Gurley that happened yesterday, as well as a little bit of the plans for the release on mainnet just immediately after Shanghai and the rewards period. So Mav, I know that Joe, I guess, has a washing machine emergency that caught fire, so he's not here with us. But I wondered if you might be around to just help answer a few questions about timing, and especially for the European listeners that are listening to this live, if they have some questions.
Yeah, sounds good. I guess Joe is human after all then. But that was a very insightful discussion. I think when it comes to companies, large institutions, there's a bit of a meme that institutions are coming, but perhaps they were here all along, or at least EtherCap. I guess there's still room for many more in the ETH staking world, but also quite interesting to hear about how different parts of the kind of staking ecosystem work for different types of entities, right? You have, for example, DAOs that cannot easily run their own node, but more than happy to diversify their treasury into liquid staking tokens. And then for institutions kind of going the other way, whereby it may not work in the kind of corporate world to hold liquid staking tokens, but staking at ETH is a lot easier. So yeah, interesting. But great to hear that there's some common values, right? I think here in the Rocket Pool community, we're obviously big fans of decentralization, so it's good to hear that there's other people out there as well who are trying to work towards this and champion it as well. So yeah, for the rest of the call, without Joe here, of course, we may have that situation again where we have to skip past a couple of the more technical topics, or I'm giving kind of high-level answers. But we do have the recording of the Friday Atlas Town Hall. That's up on YouTube now. It runs to almost 2 hours, so it has been segmented out to probably 20 or so chapters. You can click through to the part that's relevant to you, whether that is migrating a solo staking node across, or whether you're converting your existing mini pools. I would say that's probably the best source for all the latest information. So definitely make use of that resource. And as we've said, we will be holding that same call again a little bit closer to the release, and it will be around this kind of time so that hopefully we can get Europe to join in live too. That call, that's up on YouTube. We had Langers doing most of the talking and Joe as well. So it's definitely a great listen. But even since then, right, what's it been, like a couple of days, there's been some more development. So yeah, we do have a few things to talk through.
Yeah, I wonder if it's worth maybe, Mav, if you could share a couple of things. And I do encourage, if anyone has a question, to come on. We'll do our best to kind of answer it as you've had a chance to kind of digest it a little bit here. But I wonder if maybe you could share a little bit from your perspective. I suppose between last call and this call here, it's only been a matter of days, but we did see that there was an announcement that I guess a partial bug bounty was awarded to somebody for finding a flaw. I wondered if you might be able to talk about that, and or also that there was I guess a bug or an unexpected operation kind of observed when we released Atlas on Gorilli that didn't show up in the Zhejiang testnet. And it looks like that a patch is being deployed. If you could share a little bit more about that. I don't know if you know any of the technical backstory to that, or what can you tell us on either of those two?
Yeah, not much about the kind of technical details, but I can share a few thoughts. I think, first of all, these first two low bug bounty payouts, they highlight Rocket Pool's approach to security and to bug bounties. You may recall a little while ago, may have been towards the end of last year, there was a payout for similarly kind of a low impact bug bounty, but because of the way that it was well researched and documented and presented, we elected to pay out kind of a higher tier than it would otherwise fall under the Immunify classification. And it's the same thing here. So unfortunately, this, I suppose you could say, generosity or wanting to kind of encourage these security reports perhaps does create the impression that there are multiple significant bugs being found, right? But it's not necessarily a reflection of weaknesses in the protocol. These are very small things that would otherwise perhaps not even be important enough to qualify for a payout. Or if they do, it would be towards the low end of the range. So that is one thing to keep in mind. And the reason is that despite what some people may think from the outside, Rocket Pool is a relatively complex protocol. And it's important that we kind of incentivize and encourage people to, who do have enough of a working knowledge of the intricacies of Rocket Pool to, keep up the good work and keep looking into potentially identifying any flaws in there. So that's what I'd say about those two kind of smaller payouts. And then for the latest one with Gorilli, again, I think probably an example of if we didn't have trading, if we didn't have a community kind of monitoring every input and every action, it may have been a case that it was kind of pushed to testnet and the guys would have tested it there and later on an announcement made. But of course, with the high level of attention of everyone kind of spotting things as they happen, we kind of learned about it in real time. So again, an example of something that's relatively minor. It's exactly the purpose of a testnet. And I saw Kane was working with the auditors last night to just make sure that gets all wrapped up. Again, something that's not necessarily significant, but in the interest of transparency and keeping everyone up to date, we want to make sure it's quite clear what's going on. Again, sorry, I am not really qualified to go into the technical specifics of these bugs, but certainly we can check in with probably Langers on the next call. I assume by then some of this will be in the bi-weekly write-up, so we can go into it a little bit more then.
Yeah, we actually have our first question coming on for it. Let's see, Nick's going to be Nick XM is going to be connecting here in just a second. But yeah, I think that was a really good summary, Mav, on both of those items for it. And to be honest, I was kind of watching the announcement channel a little bit, but I too was actually playing with my girly installation and trying to break it in a couple of ways and provide feedback. So I didn't really have a chance to understand myself what the bug was that was first found here. Nick, I still see. Oh, here comes Nick XM. You should be able to speak now.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I was wondering if there's like ready to deploy additional mini pools, on whether it's more advantageous to deploy them pre or post Atlas. The one consideration I was thinking of was like Rocket Arb, but it seems like that's going to be less financially advantageous post Atlas. So just wondering if anyone has clarity on that. Thank you.
Hey, you did cut out a little bit there in the middle, but I'm pretty sure I understood the question. You know, do you launch now? Do you launch after Atlas?
Yeah, cool.
Again, I would probably point you back to that YouTube recording. I will answer your question, but there was a kind of more in-depth discussion about some of the considerations there. There is a chapter that kind of marks that as a question about, you know, when to launch. I think it was about halfway through the call. So yes, one consideration is Rocket Arb. It's not necessarily as large as it was in the past, and I would expect as we get closer to Shanghai, a lot of these premiums and discounts you see on secondary markets in theory should converge closer to zero. From what was said on that call on Friday, the improvements that have been made to save gas may be quite relevant. So it is more gas intensive to launch now and to convert later. I guess the question is that additional cost going to be more or less than Rocket Arb? Of course, it depends on gas. It depends on Rocket Arb. There's a lot of factors. I don't think anyone's done a kind of in-depth analysis on this, but it seemed to be the consensus that as of now, it probably makes sense to wait, and in that way you do miss out on Rocket Arb, or at least likely to. We don't know for sure, but the gas savings will probably more than make up for it. And at the end of the day, it will probably be so close to break even that it doesn't really matter that much. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. And as I said, there was more details on the YouTube recording. I'll just see if I can pull it up here to grab the timestamp. But
While Mav does that, I will share that one of the things I've been doing is kind of like a public service to the community, is trying to track the estimated gas costs for each transaction. And I just posted in the trading channel an updated spreadsheet that at least has some of the girly cost estimates, which will be the same on mainnet. I still have to wait the 48 hours to get some closing costs to mini pools that are in there, but you can at least use some of those numbers to figure out, how much more gas you'll incur by creating a half 16 now, grabbing whatever ARB you can, and then paying for bond reduction cost and conversion cost to 2 LEB8s. You can run the numbers, at least see what the cost is, and then it's up to anybody's decision to try to figure out how best to play that.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah.
All right, so I found the timestamp. It is, pretty much halfway through, 54 minutes and 7 seconds. There was a question about new mini pool launch timing, and I think it was Kane who took that one up and talked about some of the gas savings. Cheers.
Yeah, and I do welcome anybody with questions to come forward. One thing, Mav, let me just kind of refresh with you. Maybe you have an update, maybe you don't. But I know in our last call, Langers had spent quite a lot of time kind of walking through the timing on mainnet, which, as I said earlier, we're 23 days away from Shanghai, about 24 days away from the next rewards period, and then I suppose after that, maybe just hours or days away from Atlas. There was some talk about maybe trying to get an official timeline or some official communication out. Any further thoughts on that? Are we are they there yet to do that, or is it still kind of a testing and everything's tentative? What are we hearing about timelines and just kind of planning for everyone?
Yeah, I want to know too. So yeah, the goal was to have something out. I think we may have mentioned Monday. It's obviously well, it's Wednesday now down in this part of the world, but for most of the rest of the listeners, it'll be Tuesday. Still early in the week, so we may get something today. I do know that I have some kind of content ready to go once we've locked that date in, so we can shout about that a little bit. I'm not quite sure if the testnet deployment and that little hiccup will impact things, but I'm hoping that, put it this way, that if we don't necessarily have a set date that we can give later today, it does seem that everything is running to schedule. So that kind of time frame that was given on the previous call on Friday is still very much in play, being just slightly after Shanghai, but so close that it may as well be at the same time. That is still looking good. Yeah, as soon as we get a date, keen to tweet that out and create some hype around then. So for now, I guess the answer is we're still kind of tracking, it's still looking good. And yeah, barring any kind of significant findings, we should be looking at that mid-April timeframe, which is pretty good going, I think, given that we did provide that end March, mid-April timeframe from a little while ago now, if not last year, certainly kind of the start of this year. So considering the importance of Atlas and everything that's involved, yeah, the guys have done a pretty good job, I think, to remain so close to that original time frame.
Yeah, from my point of view, I mean, it was interesting after having a little bit of time to digest everything that Lingers had shared in the last call. I mean, I actually think it's a much more simplistic time ordering, right? The number of variables and conditions of like Atlas and Redstone, or I mean, Redstone and Shanghai, and then Atlas, post Shanghai versus Atlas in both pre and post. I think it simplifies the number of variables, and I think like you, if the timing is relatively close to each other, I mean, within days of each event, I mean, that is just as good as simultaneous without all the confusion. So I was actually feeling really positive about the shared timeline, but I do think it would be good to lock it down. I was thinking that the key thing that wasn't really communicated, I mean, whether or not you're on Atlas or not Atlas is, I think the advantage there is LEB8s and conversions and so forth. But the thing that every node operator has to do is they have to be on the latest clients in order to make the Chapella fork, right? And for us, that's going to be the Smart Node Stack 1.9 that will be released on mainnet. So if you're at least listening to this and you're not certain if you're going to take advantage of LEB8s, how you're going to play that out, or conversions, or creating new mini pools with any ETH rewards that you might have earned. The one key takeaway is, we need to pay attention to when the next smart node stack will be out, 1.9, and we need to make certain as node operators that we install that and have that up and running ahead of the Chapella fork. Otherwise, we'll miss the fork, and that happened last time in the merge. We lost some nodes that missed the fork. So definitely at least mark that on your calendars when that date comes out, that you definitely want to do that.
Yeah, and it sounds like some of this might be quite close to Shanghai, so certainly something that you want to keep a close eye on. Obviously, it would be nice if everything could be sorted well in advance, but it's just one of these things that everything will kind of come together quite close before the time. So yeah, definitely keep an eye out in Discord for all the latest updates there.
Yeah. Well, Mav, anything here? I'm not seeing any other questions either in trading or coming through here, but are there any things that we haven't covered, or things from your perspective that you feel the community really should know about or hear from you, or any little bit of bread that you can share with us?
First of all, I guess we could talk about a couple of topics that have come up and came up as questions on the Friday call. the audits more broadly, the latest status for that is there was a bit of back and forth between, I think it was mostly Kane and CD about getting the reports out. The latest was that we kind of, between the two of us, agreed that everything looked good and we could release the reports. The only thing is now, of course, with that testnet bug last night, whether that will potentially require another quick review from CD and any changes to the report. So it is it's almost there. It's coming soon. But yeah, I suppose today we'll be working through the significance of that. It seems to be very, very straightforward, but it's one of these things that, we can't afford to take any risks whatsoever. So thankfully, while both of the auditing teams are great to work with from the sounds of things, so I'm sure there won't be any issues. It's just more so, I guess, unfortunate timing, right? That it happens so close to the call that I can't quite give a whole lot in the way of context. We will have a chit chat on Friday though, so I'm sure one of the guys will be around then to share some updates. That is not recorded though, so unfortunately, yeah, again, because that's at a time not suitable for Europe, may have to pop into trading the next day and check in and see where we're at on them. But yeah, just another one of these, I guess, admin loose ends to be tied up. Shouldn't be too much longer. I think right now we are in kind of a bit of a lull or doldrums, whatever you want to call it, between the hype of ETH Denver and everything that was going on there, and then the hype of being able to have some stuff out around Atlas in terms of timelines, updated website content, educational pieces. But rest assured that things on both the development side and then the marketing comms side are ticking along behind the scenes, kind of getting everything ready to go. And yeah, we've got on the marketing side at least a pretty packed calendar of content in the, what is it now, 4 weeks, less than?
Yeah, 23 days and counting here, so yeah, I mean, if I could encourage, I know it's always a timing and kind of getting it released so you release it right, but from my point of view, I mean, there are just such talented individuals in our community. We've got a number of giga brains as it is, and to the degree that they can release stuff to the community, it opens it up so that many people can start looking at it, dissecting holes, finding problems, and the sooner they do that, it just gives the community much more time to analyze, digest, and respond in a constructive way.
Yeah, for sure. We'll certainly be, of course, announcing things in Discord as we usually do, but also putting some, I guess, CTAs, calls to action, out on Twitter to encourage kind of participation around that. Because I guess it is similar to Ethereum and staking itself, right? You need that diversity to solve the problem of testing, right? Everyone has a slightly different way of doing things, a slightly different way of looking at things, different kind of background and experience. And as Langus has said many times, and it's true for many things, right? If it's something you've coded or a document you've written, you tend to not find the mistakes, right? Because you have a different mindset and a different way of looking at it. So it is extremely valuable to have people kind of come in cold with different assumptions and understandings and, literally try to pick out problems and break things. It's extremely valuable. And I guess in that sense, it does kind of behave like an augmented audit team, really, just by the sheer numbers. I will take the opportunity to shill some of our upcoming calls. Obviously, I mentioned the chit chat on Friday, so we'll be looking to reinstate them. We do have as I said earlier, an earlier time frame Atlas Town Hall Part 2 coming up. That is at a date that's still to be confirmed. We want a few of these things around Atlas to be kind of finalized and pushed out, dates to be announced, a little bit more certainty before we hold the second call. There may be different topics and questions that come out of that, right? But we do have a few calls scheduled. So for next week's community call hosted by Jasper, that'll be the bi-weekly week, we have a special guest from Crypto Tax Calculator. So not necessarily a very sexy topic, but still very important. They are actually based in Australia, and they'll be sharing a few things. I think there were, I think they had some, was it like analytics or reporting services available, or some kind of dashboard. I think it was free. They may be offering discounts on their services, but regardless, hopefully we can get some good discussions out of that. I know for, well, at least for New Zealand, our kind of tax year ends very soon. I'm pretty sure for Australia it's in June, and I think for US, someone mentioned about some date in April. So
April 15th.
So it might be a good time to tune to that call if you've kind of been putting off the tax side of things, and then the following week, so pretty much 2 weeks exactly from this call, again with Ken, we'll have another special guest, this time from Telefinance. So you can pop into the events channel in Discord. You can find the Telefinance event, which should be the second one, and click through to their Twitter there if you want to have a little learn a little bit more about that DeFi protocol. So I'm pretty sure, if not during the call or a little before, they'll have some kind of announcement in terms of integrating, I think it's rETH, but we'll leave that for them to share the specifics of. And then, of course, is it the following week? I think it is. Just like for the merge, we'd encourage everyone to tune in to the ETHSaker live stream of the Shanghai or Shapella hard fork on mainnet, participate in that occasion. And then not long after, just as we did for Redstone, the Rocket Pool team will be hosting a call for the Atlas upgrade. There may or may not be a Shui or Shuis involved, but regardless, I'd encourage everyone to tune into that one as well. Because we don't have a date for Atlas, we don't have a date for that event, but it'll be not too much longer after the ETHSaker Shapella one. So keep an eye out for that.
Amazing. A lot to really look forward coming up here. It's going to go by very fast. I mean, all of these things happen sequentially within very short time periods of each other. And I guess we're at a point where we've got to really understand from the team, is it a go, no go situation? So I'm looking very forward to any information about a timeline and official estimated dates of launch. That would be awesome.
Yeah, for sure. We do also have a couple of, I think it's even 3 or 4 other kind of calls, interviews, AMAs that are being scheduled for closer to Atlas or slightly after, just so we can create a bit of awareness and hype around that event too. So if things do crop up around now, I'm trying as much as possible to fit them into an increasingly busy schedule around that time, because that's when we'll be wanting to get the word out about Rocket Pool as much as possible. I guess there's one exception to that though, which is for Solar Stakers wanting to migrate across. For them, there's an important thing to note right now, which is their withdrawal credentials. We have mentioned it a couple times in passing, but there are plans to, if not today, tomorrow, certainly this week, to make a little bit of noise around that, just letting people know that they have to be on the 0x00 credentials to migrate across. Of course, there's still the option to exit and launch with Rocket Pool, but it's a lot easier, more straightforward, and you get to jump the withdrawals queue if you simply migrate across. So would encourage anyone on the call who's even thinking about that possibility to have a little bit of a think, do some research, and at the very least, don't make that jump right now to 0x01 because it will essentially lock you out from that migration feature.
Yeah, in fact, they would actually get a jump 2 queues, not only the full withdrawal exit queue, but they also get a jump the entry queue if there is one. And post Shanghai, there very well could be.
Yeah, especially if we have a whole lot of institutions wanting to stake their tens of thousands of ETH. You never know; it could be quite the queue.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't know exactly when Kraken is going to divest itself of its U.S.-based staking, and so that will add to an exit queue, and that ETH probably will find another home somewhere else to go back into the entry queue. So I do expect there to be long lines in the world of the beacon chain coming up post Shanghai. I could be surprised, but that's at least what my gut is telling me here initially. The one last question I had for you, Mav, unless you have any other things to share, is at the end of the call, Langers did share a little bit of Cat 5 bread in that there are plans now to, I guess, expand the number of staff on the Rocket Pool team. And I wondered if you might have any further update on that. And in particular, one of the positions sounded like it's going to be very helpful to relieve some load on you, or maybe you and Langers, which is I can't remember the title that he used, but it sounded like it was an integrations person, or at least in the broader sense. Do you have any more information you could share about that in terms of what that ideal applicant would look like?
So I'm not involved with this process, but I can share some thoughts around the second non-technical role. I guess the word that was mentioned was around partnerships, and my understanding is it's some of this higher level stuff, like for example the dozens of calls that Dave was having with Coinbase Ventures. So not necessarily the smaller kind of day-to-day interactions that I have with DeFi protocols working on integrations. It was kind of maybe a slightly more senior role. But it's some of these, strategically important, larger partnerships, especially when it comes to large companies like Coinbase, right? Who have a lot of staff, and the way they operate as a result tends to be quite time intensive, and it's hard to balance that out when on the Rocket Pool side, we're so lean. So whether it's CBV or potentially institutions or wallets, it is very time intensive to be kind of stuck on calls all day long, and sometimes it is all day long, right? Because you have to align with different time zones, so you're jumping off calls and onto others. I feel like the dev role is probably more important, probably more time critical that kind of progress is made on that. And I think this is something that's been floating around for a little while, certainly longer than the kind of partnerships role. So I would expect, I might be wrong, but I'd expect for there to be some more details out on that dev role first, potentially the kind of partnerships side of things to follow a little bit later on. But yeah, whoever does end up in that role, they may be working with me a little bit, unfortunately, probably a lot with Langers and Dave, but that is still kind of to be fleshed out, I think. The couple of discussions that we had about it as a team at Denver was very much high level, kind of throwing some ideas around pretty much exactly what I just shared. So again, it may be like this dev role that's been talked about for a little while, as can be the case with Rocket Pool. It may take a little bit longer than some people want, but it will get there in the end. And looking forward to reading these job descriptions and seeing who applies and eventually ends up part of the team.
Yeah. I know that there's a number of individuals in the community that I think are very excited about the opportunity to apply. So I'm hoping, I know the focus right now is probably everything Atlas and Shanghai, but I'm hoping we'll see these things come along, right? Because the work after Atlas is going to be pretty intense, right? I know the team's probably hoping they'll be able to take a breather, but if there's anything I've learned in this space, it's that it doesn't really slow down. The pace just seems to get more and more frantic every time there's a release, and as the protocol is growing, there's just more and more opportunities for development and integrations and growth opportunities.
Oh yeah, for sure. I have to say, when I woke up and checked my messages this morning, I kind of fell into that trap of, it's a little bit quiet right now. So of course that means that tomorrow, or maybe even later today, it'll go straight back to the chaos. But you are right. There's never a dull moment, or the dull moments comparatively that you do get really is just an opportunity to catch up from the previous period of chaos before it goes straight back into it. There's one thing that I'll say around kind of the roles and hiring. I can't say I have any professional HR expertise, but in my times working in teams around this part of the world, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, remote teams, it is relatively straightforward in most cases to find someone who can fulfill the basics of a role in terms of the skills or the technical requirements. But more important than that is kind of people's, team fit. At the end of the day, when you have a small and purely remote team, I think that's even more important. And it can really make or break things. So, very much being a team player is, I think, an essential in this kind of exciting new world of fully remote crypto work teams. I love it. May not be for everyone. You might not be meeting people for months or a year, but exciting to see what happens with that process of bringing a couple more people on board.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mav, it has been, again, an absolute pleasure to do these community calls. It's always one of the highlights of my week. It was absolutely fascinating, if people had listened to the entire call, to learn a little bit about ETH Capital. And we heard from Brian, who just seemed to be a very inspiring OG Ethereum. And it's really neat to see an institutional company being built on kind of the same ethos as all the values that we hold. And Mav, thank you for sharing what you know about Atlas and keeping the community updated. And I'm looking very much forward to any further updates you could share with us as the week progresses.
Absolutely. And as always, thanks for being a great host, Ken. And I'm guessing we'll see you and a few more people on the chit chat on Friday, which reminds me I have to add that into the Discord events list. I'll get onto that after this call. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, everyone, for listening in. And as usual, we'll get a recording up on YouTube later today.
All right, everyone, have a great day.